My name is Eleanor, and I'm 78 years old. I've lived a long life, some of it beautiful, much of it painful, but if you're listening to this, I want to tell you something no one ever told me. Sometimes, the people you trust the most will hurt you in ways you never imagined. And when that happens, you're forced to choose. Do you give up, or do you rise from the ashes? I never imagined I'd be telling this story, especially not at my age. But after everything I've been through, maybe sharing it will help someone. Out there, some woman sitting alone in her kitchen, wondering where it all went wrong. I was married for 40 years. 40 years. That's more than half my life. I met my husband Daniel when I was just 19. He was tall, charming, full of dreams and ambition. I was quiet, shy, and I had no idea what life had in store for me. But when he smiled at me at the town fair, I thought I'd found my forever. And for a long time, I truly believed I had. We got married 2 years later, in a little white chapel surrounded by family and friends. My best friend Linda stood by my side as my maid of honor. She and I had been inseparable since college. She was bold, lively, and always had a sparkle in her eye, the kind of woman who lit up a room. People often joked that we were like sisters, and to me, she was family. Never in a million years did I think she'd be the one to destroy mine. Daniel and I built a life together. We had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. I stayed home to raise them, gave up my career, and poured everything I had into being a wife and mother. Daniel worked long hours, built his business from the ground up, and for a while, we were a team. We weren't perfect, but we were stable. We had traditions: Sunday dinners, Christmas at our house, summer trips to the lake. Our house was always full of laughter, warmth, and Linda. She was at every birthday, every holiday, every big moment. She was like a second mother to my kids. Looking back now, I wonder if the signs were always there, hidden in plain sight, the way she looked at him sometimes, the way he smiled at her jokes a little longer than he should have. But I was too busy being a wife, a mom, a homemaker, to trusting, to naive. In our later years, things began to shift. Daniel grew distant. He was quiet at dinner, always checking his phone. He started working late again, even though the business practically ran itself by then. I asked him if something was wrong, but he brushed it off. Just tired, he'd say. Or don't start with the questions, Eleanor. So I stopped asking. I thought maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was just getting old. Linda, meanwhile, was closer than ever. She'd drop by unannounced, bring over wine, ask about Daniel. Sometimes she'd stay for dinner, sit a little too close to him, laugh a little too loud. I told myself it was just my imagination. I wanted to believe the best about the people I loved. But one night, everything changed. I was cleaning out the laundry room when I found a scarf in Daniel's coat pocket. My heart dropped. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she left it in the car. But when I confronted him, his silence said everything. He didn't deny it. He didn't even apologize. He just looked at me and said, "I didn't mean for it to happen, Eleanor, but I love her." 40 years. 40 years of memories, of children, of sacrifices, and he threw it all away for the woman I called my sister. I was numb. I remember sitting in our bedroom, staring at the wall, thinking, how do you rebuild a life when it's been stolen from you? But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came when I told our children. I expected tears, anger, support, anything, but instead, they shrugged. My oldest son said, "Mom, people fall out of love. You can't blame him for being happy." My daughter told me maybe I was being too emotional, and just like that, I wasn't just betrayed by my husband and my best friend, I was abandoned by my children, too. I remember the sound of the front door closing behind them. I stood in the hallway, completely alone in the house I helped build, realizing no one was coming to check on me. No one cared. That's when I knew the life I had was over. But my story doesn't end there. Oh no. What came after the pain, the loneliness, the unexpected strength I'll share, all of that with you. Because if I made it through this, maybe you can, too. I still remember the first time I saw Daniel. It was the summer of 1965, and I was just 19, working part-time at a small bakery in town while studying at the local college. He came in on a Friday afternoon, tall and confident, with a smile that could melt butter. Believe me, it did. He asked for a cinnamon bun, but he barely looked at the pastries. His eyes were fixed on me. "I'll take whatever you recommend," he said with that grin that would later become his signature. I handed him the bun, and he asked for my name. I was painfully shy back then. I muttered, "Eleanor," and looked down. He said, "Well, Eleanor, I guess I'll be back tomorrow." And he was. Every day after that he kept showing up, sometimes for a cookie, sometimes for a coffee, but always with a new excuse to talk to me. Within 2 weeks, he asked me out. We went to a movie. I don't even remember what was playing, because all I could focus on was the way he held my hand like I was something precious. He made me feel like I mattered, like I was the most important person in the world. Daniel was ambitious. He talked about opening his own construction business, building homes, creating a future. I was drawn to his drive. I'd grown up in a quiet, modest family where no one dreamed big. Daniel was different. He had plans. He made me believe I could be part of something greater. We got married a year later. I wore my mother's dress. It wasn't fancy, but I felt beautiful in it. Linda was my maid of honor, and Daniel's best man toasted to a love that would last forever. I truly believed it would. Isn't that what every young bride believes? We moved into a tiny apartment above a hardware store, while Daniel worked long days on construction sites. I took a job as a school secretary, and every night we'd sit on the floor, eat canned soup, and talk about the future we were building. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. After 3 years, we had our first son, Michael. Then came Paul, and finally, our daughter, Emily. I quit my job to stay home with them, and Daniel's business began to grow. Slowly, we moved into a nicer home, then bought our forever house when I was in my late 30s. I thought we had made it. I thought we were happy. Looking back, it's almost cruel how beautiful those early years were. It makes the betrayal that came later even harder to bear. But during those decades, Daniel was a good father. He taught the boys how to fish, built Emily a dollhouse with his own hands, and never missed a school recital. He kissed me every morning, brought me flowers on our anniversary, and made me laugh when life got hard. He was the man I trusted with everything, the man I built my life around. And Linda, she was there for all of it. She and I met in college during a literature class. She was the loud one in the back who always had an opinion, while I preferred to blend into the background. But somehow, we became inseparable. She was the friend I called when I was overwhelmed with the kids, when I needed help planning a party, when I just wanted someone to listen. She was even in the delivery room when Emily was born, holding my hand while Daniel nervously paced outside. I used to thank God for putting her in my life. I never thought I had to protect myself from her. We had double dates, girls' nights, family trips. There were Christmases when she stayed with us instead of traveling to see her own relatives. I trusted her completely. So much so that when she offered to help Daniel with the office side of his business after his secretary retired, I encouraged it. "She's smart," I said, "and you two get along so well." God help me, I was so blind. For years, we lived what I thought was a beautiful life, and in many ways, it was. We had dinners together, birthdays, grandchildren. Daniel held my hand in church every Sunday. I remember thinking once, as we sat side by side during a hymn, we really made it. After all these years, we're still together. But I didn't know then what I know now. Some betrayals take a lifetime to bloom. And when they do, they leave nothing standing. I don't know exactly when Daniel started seeing Linda behind my back. Maybe it was one late night at the office. Maybe it was something that had been simmering for years. But what I do know is this: the man I loved for 40 years, and the woman I called my sister, were slowly chiseling away at the life I had built with my bare hands, and I never saw it coming. If someone had asked me a few years ago who I trusted most in the world, besides my husband, I would have said, without hesitation, Linda. She wasn't just my best friend, she was family. In fact, there were times when I felt closer to her than to my own sisters. We'd known each other since we were 18, young and wide-eyed, just trying to make it through college without falling apart. She was the bold one, the outspoken one, the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. I was quieter, more cautious, but maybe that's why we worked so well together. Linda had a way of making life feel more exciting. She always knew the best places to eat, the funniest jokes, the most creative gift ideas. When I got married to Daniel, she planned my bridal shower. When I had my first child, she was the first person to visit me at the hospital. She held my hand when I cried from exhaustion. She helped paint the nursery, and she even took the boys on weekends when I needed to rest. She was there always. When we bought our family home, Linda practically became a part of our household. She knew where we kept the extra key. She'd come over unannounced with muffins or a new book she thought I'd like. She called my children her bonus kids. At first, it warmed my heart. I loved that she loved them. I thought, how lucky am I to have such a devoted friend. Linda never married. She had a string of relationships over the years, some good, some painful, but she always said she preferred her independence. I like having my own space, she used to say with a smirk. I get to borrow your family without all the responsibility. I thought it was a joke. I laughed along. God help me, I laughed. When Daniel's business started growing and he lost his longtime secretary to retirement, it was Linda who offered to help. Just until you find someone new, she said. She had experience in office work, and Daniel trusted her just like I did. I didn't even blink. I encouraged it. I said, it'll be nice having someone you know on your team. And it was. At first, they got along well, too well, maybe. I told myself they were just comfortable with each other. They joked during dinners, shared stories from work. Sometimes I'd walk in and find them laughing about something I wasn't part of. It stung a little, but I brushed it off. They spend time together all day, I reasoned. Of course they have their own inside jokes. I started noticing small things. Daniel would linger a little too long when hugging her goodbye. Linda would compliment him more than usual. One night, during a barbecue, she touched his arm and laughed at something that wasn't even funny. My stomach tightened, but I forced a smile. Don't be ridiculous, I told myself. You're overthinking. I wasn't. There was one evening, one of those moments that stays etched in your memory like a scar. Daniel had gone upstairs to take a call. I was in the kitchen cleaning up, and Linda stayed behind with me. We were chatting about nothing in particular when she suddenly looked me in the eye and said, you know, if anything ever happened between you and Daniel, I'd always be here for him. I laughed awkwardly, thinking she was joking, but the way she looked at MIT was different, cold, calculating, and for the first time in 40 years, I felt like I didn't know her at all. I didn't say anything to Daniel that night. I wanted to believe I was being paranoid, that I was imagining things, but something had shifted. I could feel it in my bones. And then there were the excuses. Linda started canceling our lunch dates. She said she was busy with work, or too tired lately. She didn't answer my calls as quickly. She wasn't around for family dinners anymore, not unless Daniel was the one inviting her. I told myself maybe she just needed space. Maybe she was dating someone and didn't want to talk about it. The truth was too ugly to even whisper to myself. Then came the scarf. I already told you about it, how I found it in Daniel's coat pocket while doing laundry. It was blue, soft cashmere, a scarf I'd given Linda for Christmas the year before. At first, I thought maybe she had left it in our car, but something didn't add up. Daniel didn't even flinch when I held it up and asked, why do you have this? He just stared at me. That's when my heart dropped into my stomach. And then came the words I will never forget. I didn't mean for it to happen, Eleanor, but I love her. It felt like I had been punched in the chest. All the air rushed out of my lungs. I couldn't even speak. I just stood there, holding that scarf like it was a piece of my broken heart. Linda didn't even have the decency to face me. She sent me a message. A message. I'm sorry if this hurts you, but Daniel and I are meant to be. Meant to be. What was I then? A placeholder. A stepping stone. I gave Linda my friendship, my loyalty, my trust. I invited her into my family, and she repaid me by tearing it apart from the inside out. That was the night I stopped believing in lifelong friendships. And sadly, it was only the beginning of the nightmare. When you've been married for 40 years, you learn to forgive the little things. You ignore the socks left on the floor, the way he chews too loudly, or the fact that he never remembers where you put the scissors. You tell yourself it's normal, that love, real love, is about patience, tolerance, choosing your partner every day, even when it's hard. And that's what I did with Daniel. I chose him over and over again. Through the busy years of raising 3 children, through the late nights when he worked double shifts, through the fights and the silences and the holidays where he forgot to buy a gift. I chose him because I believed that's what love meant. I didn't expect perfection. I just expected loyalty. But years before I found Linda's scarf, before he looked me in the eye and confessed he loved her, something inside our marriage had already begun to rot. Slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. It started with the silences. Daniel used to tell me everything. Even after the kids moved out, we had our little routines. Morning coffee on the porch, reading the newspaper together, talking about nothing at all. But then he started getting quieter, more distracted. I'd ask him how his day went and he'd shrug. Same as always. He stopped making eye contact, stopped asking me how I was doing. The space between us, once filled with laughter and old inside jokes, started to feel cold and empty. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't interesting anymore. Maybe he was tired of hearing the same stories. Maybe I was just too old. I started trying harder, cooking his favorite meals, wearing the perfume he once said he loved, asking more questions, smiling more. But it was like trying to dance with a ghost. Then came the business trips. Daniel hadn't traveled for work in years. His construction company was stable. His employees managed most of the projects, and we were well into our retirement plans. So when he suddenly announced he'd be going out of town for a few days, I was surprised. Why now? I asked. He gave vague answers. A client wants to meet in person. We're checking on a property 2 hours away. Always just enough to seem plausible. I didn't question him, not at first. But when I called him one night and his phone went straight to voicemail, a chill ran down my spine. The next morning, he texted, "Sorry, my phone died." Just that. No, I miss you. No warmth, no explanation. He came back the next day smelling of a cologne he never wore before. That night, he fell asleep with his back to me. I stared at the ceiling and told myself, maybe he's just tired, but something deep in my chest whispered, no, something's wrong. He started locking his phone. That might not sound like a big deal, but we'd never had secrets. He'd always left his phone on the kitchen counter, charging overnight. Suddenly it was glued to his pocket. He'd turn the screen away from me when it lit up. Once, I caught a glimpse of a message, just the name L, before he quickly swiped it away. My stomach dropped. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I needed to be sure. I didn't want to be the paranoid old wife accusing her husband of something that might be nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I felt it in the pit of my soul. He stopped touching me. Weeks went by, then months. No kisses on the cheek. No warm hands in bed. No whispered goodnights. The man who once couldn't fall asleep unless I was curled against him now turned away like I was a stranger. I started talking to myself in the mirror, practicing the questions I was too afraid to ask out loud. Are you seeing someone else, Daniel? Do you still love me? Is it Linda? But the truth is, I didn't want the answers, because deep down, I already knew. Linda became distant too. She no longer stayed for dinner. She stopped asking about me. When we did talk, her voice sounded rehearsed, cold. One day, she called and asked if Daniel was home. Just like that. Number. Hey, how are you? Just, is Daniel there? I froze. My fingers tightened around the phone. Why? I asked. There was a long pause on her end, then she mumbled, oh, just wanted to ask him something about the office. I handed him the phone and walked out of the room, but in my chest, something cracked. From that moment on, I stopped pretending. I began watching them more carefully. Their glances. The sudden silence when I walked into a room. The coincidental meetings that felt too convenient. I began sleeping with a knot in my stomach. I started having dreams where I was drowning, reaching out for someone, anyone, but no one came. Not Daniel, not Linda, not even my children. Looking back, I realized those were the first real cracks, not just in my marriage, but in my world. And once the foundation is fractured, it doesn't take long for everything to come crashing down. It was a Thursday afternoon. I remember that clearly, because I always did laundry on Thursdays. After all those years, my life had fallen into a rhythm, a quiet routine of simple tasks and soft moments. Fold the towels, sweep the kitchen, water the plants by the window. It gave me a sense of purpose, a sense of control. But that day, everything changed. I was doing Daniel's laundry like I always had. After 40 years of marriage, you stop thinking about things like that. You just do them, because it's part of the rhythm. You clean, you fold, you make his favorite tea. You pretend everything is fine, even when your heart feels like a bruised apple, soft sore, ready to collapse. I reached into the pocket of his coat to check for receipts or loose change, and that's when I felt it. Soft, familiar, expensive. I pulled out a scarf, a light blue cashmere scarf, the very one I had given Linda for Christmas the year before. I recognized it instantly. It had a small embroidered L in one corner. She had cried when I gave it to her, said it was the nicest gift anyone had ever given her. So why was it in my husband's coat pocket? At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she left it in the car. Maybe he was returning it to her. Maybe, but my hands were shaking. I held it to my chest and walked to the living room, waiting for Daniel to come home. He walked in an hour later, briefcase in hand, phone in the other. I watched him walk past me, kiss me on the cheek like nothing was wrong, and head to the kitchen. I followed him in silence. When he turned around, I was holding the scarf. His face changed. He froze. His jaw tightened. He didn't ask where I found it. He didn't make a joke. He didn't even pretend to be confused. He just stared at it and then at me. I said, very quietly, "Why do you have Linda's scarf?" And after a long pause, he said the words that shattered my world. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Eleanor, but I love her." I remember blinking, just blinking, like if I didn't respond, maybe the words would disappear. But they didn't. They just hung in the air, thick and cruel, impossible to unhear. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to shake him and ask how he could do this to me, to our family, to everything we had built together. But instead, I sat down. My legs wouldn't hold me up. I felt like the ground beneath me had crumbled into dust. I said, "How long?" He looked down. "A while," he said. "We didn't plan it. It just happened." I whispered. "You mean, she knows, she loves you too?" He nodded. I think the worst part was that he didn't even seem ashamed. Not really. His eyes weren't filled with regret, were calm, almost relieved, like finally saying it out loud was some kind of freedom for him. But for me, it was a death sentence. My hands trembled as I clutched the scarf. All I could think about were the holidays we had spent together, Linda and I cooking side by side, her laughing with my grandchildren, her toasting to our anniversaries. All the while, she was waiting for my husband to choose her. I asked him, "Do our children know?" He hesitated. That was all the answer I needed. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed while Daniel slept in the guest room, his choice, not mine. I stared at the window as the hours passed. Morning light crept in, and I felt like I hadn't blinked once. I called each of our children. I expected them to cry, to rage, to come rushing over to comfort me. Instead, I got silence, discomfort. Michael, my oldest, said, "Mom, people fall out of love. It's sad, but it happens." Paul asked me not to make things dramatic, and Emily, my sweet girl, my baby, said, "Maybe it's for the best. Dad deserves to be happy too." That was when I realized something that hurt deeper than the betrayal itself. I was alone, not just emotionally. I was truly alone. My children, the ones I had raised and protected, chose their father's happiness over my pain. They chose Linda because she was still young and fun and exciting, because she made them laugh, because they never saw the nights I stayed awake with them as babies, or the years I worked side jobs, just to buy them new school clothes. All they saw was a tired old woman, who was, perhaps, no longer necessary. I hung up the phone, one by one, and just sat there. The silence in the house was louder than ever. Every photograph on the wall felt like a lie. Every corner of that home was soaked in memories of a life that no longer existed. That was the day my world fell apart, the day I realized I wasn't just losing my husband, I was losing my identity, my family, and everything I thought was permanent. And yet, I didn't cry, not yet, because when you've been gutted that deeply, the tears take time to find their way out. You can survive a broken heart. People do it every day. You can survive betrayal, even when it comes from the man you built your life around. But what no one tells you, what I never could have imagined, is how much it breaks your soul when your own children turn their backs on you. After Daniel admitted he was in love with Linda, I felt like I was living in a nightmare. But somewhere in my broken heart, I still had hope. Hope that at least my children, our children, would see the truth. That they'd see how wrong this all was, that they'd hold my hand and tell me, "We're with you, Mom, we've got you." But that's not what happened. I called Michael first. He's my oldest, the one I always thought had my heart. When he was little, he used to crawl into bed with me after nightmares. He was the one who stayed up late with me baking cookies before Christmas, the one who cried when I dropped him off at college because he didn't want to leave me behind, so I told him everything, every detail. I didn't exaggerate, I didn't scream, I just told the truth. I expected his voice to tremble with rage. I expected him to come over, maybe confront his father. But instead he was quiet, and then he sighed. Mom, he said, I don't want to get in the middle of this. You and Dad, you've had problems for years. That felt like a slap. Problems, since when? I gave everything to that marriage. And Michael knew that. He'd seen it. I said, you don't understand, Michael. He cheated on me with Linda, with the woman who helped raise you. He replied, I'm not saying it's right, but maybe he's happier now. Happier. What about me? What about the 40 years I sacrificed? What about the promises? I hung up feeling like my insides had turned to ice. Then I called Paul, my middle son. Paul has always been the logical one, the peacemaker. I thought maybe he'd help the others see sense. But Paul was worse. Mom, he said, you've always made things emotional. He said I had a tendency to overreact. He said maybe it was time I let Dad move on, and maybe I should too. I asked him how he could say that, knowing everything Linda had meant to me. He said, maybe you two just grew apart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him if he remembered the times I stayed up late sewing his Halloween costumes by hand. If he remembered how I packed his lunch every day with little notes when he was bullied in school. I wanted to ask if any of it meant anything now. But the silence was louder than anything I could have said. Finally, I called Emily, my only daughter. She was always my baby. We used to have spa nights at home, just the two of us. I saved her childhood drawings in a shoebox under my bed. When she got married, I cried as I pinned her veil. She picked up the phone sounding tired. I told her, gently, that her father had left me for Linda. There was a pause. I could hear her breathe. Then, she said, I just think Dad deserves to be happy. That broke me. I couldn't even respond. My tongue felt too heavy in my mouth. My ears rang. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but I couldn't even lift my hand. I sat there, with that cold little device against my cheek, and realized I no longer had a place in my children's lives. They didn't see me as the woman who raised them. They saw me as, what? Bitter, old, in the way. That night, I made dinner for one. I sat at the same kitchen table where we had celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, where we had laughed, cried, fought, prayed. I lit a candle out of habit. I stared at the empty chairs around me and felt like a ghost in my own home. My phone didn't ring, no one came, and I realized something that haunted me. In their minds, I was already gone. They visited Daniel and Linda. They accepted their relationship as if it had always been there. They took their children to see them on Sundays. They sent them cards on holidays. And me, I got silence. I tried writing letters. I tried being the bigger person. I even tried inviting them over just to talk. But I was met with excuses. We're busy, Mom. We'll see if we can make it. Let's plan for next month. Month after month passed. And eventually, I stopped asking Dot. I spent my 69th birthday alone. I made myself a cake vanilla with strawberry filling, just like I used to make for them. I sat on the couch and looked through photo albums. And when I blew out the candle, I wished for one thing, that they would remember who I used to be, before the betrayal, before the silence, before they decided I didn't matter. There's a silence that settles over a house when it's no longer a home. It's not just the absence of noise, it's the absence of presence, of laughter, of footsteps, of someone calling your name from the other room. It's a heavy, hollow kind of silence that follows you from room to room, like a shadow that never leaves. That was my life after Daniel left. After the calls with my children, their cold voices, their hollow words, I stopped trying to explain myself. What was the point? They had made their choice, and it wasn't me. Daniel moved in with Linda just weeks after he left our house. Our house, the place we built together, the place where we raised our children. He didn't even look back. I watched from the kitchen window as a moving truck pulled into our driveway and took away the pieces of him, his suits, his books, a few framed photos, gone, like 40 years meant nothing. That first week was the hardest. I kept forgetting he wasn't there. I'd catch myself setting the table for two. I'd find myself picking up his favorite snacks at the grocery store. One night, I reached over in bed to hold his hand just like I used to and felt only the cold, empty sheets. The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, listening to the house creak. The wind whistled through the old windows, and wonder if anyone else in the world felt as lonely as I did. I missed the sound of Daniel's snoring. I missed the warmth of another body in the bed. I missed being seen. During the day, I tried to keep busy. I cleaned. I reorganized the pantry. I baked too much bread. But no matter how many chores I gave myself, the truth remained. No one was coming through that door. No one was checking on me. No one cared if I was okay. Linda had taken my husband. My children had taken her side, and I was left with 4 walls, fading memories, and a heart that ached with every beat. I tried reaching out to old friends. I called Marjorie, a woman I used to have lunch with every Tuesday. She sounded surprised to hear from me. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, "I've just been so busy. We'll talk soon." Okay. We never did. Word had spread, I suppose, and people don't like getting involved in messy situations. It's easier to stay away, easier to whisper behind your back than sit across from you and ask if you're okay. So I stopped reaching out. I spent entire days without speaking a single word to anyone. I started talking to the television just to hear the sound of my own voice. I'd sit in my armchair, Daniel's old chair, the one he used to claim as his throne, and pretend he was still there, just for a moment, just long enough to remember what it felt like not to be invisible. I found comfort in strange places. The stray cat that wandered into my backyard. The mailman who always smiled and said, "Good morning, ma'am." The cashier at the supermarket who asked if I needed help carrying my bags. These small acts of kindness became lifelines. But even so, the loneliness was suffocating. I wasn't just alone, I was forgotten. My children stopped calling entirely. Holidays came and went. Birthdays passed. Not even a card. I saw photos online, yes. Even I figured out how to check social media eventually. There they were, smiling, laughing, celebrating at Daniel and Linda's new home. Linda, cutting the turkey, Linda, holding my grandchildren, Linda sitting in my chair. It felt like I had died and someone else had taken my place. There were days when I couldn't get out of bed, days when the grief sat on my chest like a boulder. I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder, what did I do to deserve this? I replayed every moment, every memory, trying to find the moment it all went wrong, but I couldn't find it, because I had done everything I was supposed to do. I loved, I gave, I sacrificed, and it still wasn't enough. There was one more. Remember it so clearly, when I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. My face was tired, my eyes were dull. My hair, once always neatly styled, was flat and gray and lifeless. I looked like a stranger, and that scared me more than anything. I realized I wasn't just mourning the loss of my family. I was mourning me. Somewhere along the way, I had disappeared. I had become a wife, a mother, a caretaker, but never just Eleanor. And now that everyone was gone, I didn't know who I was without them. It's a terrifying thing, to be alone after decades of being needed, but it was also, strangely, a turning point. Because once you're alone, truly alone, you have only 2 choices. Let the loneliness destroy you, or learn how to live with it. And somehow, I knew I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Asterisk, they say. You never really know how strong you are until being strong is the only choice you have. For a long time, I didn't feel strong. I felt broken, discarded, like a used-up memory everyone had moved on from. But something shifted slowly, like the seasons changing without permission. It started with a morning walk. I remember waking up one day, feeling like the walls of the house were closing in. The silence was unbearable. I hadn't spoken to another person in over 2 days. I sat at the edge of my bed, still in my nightgown, and stared at the photo of my younger self on the dresser. The woman in the picture looked full of life, bright, full of dreams. I whispered to her, "Where did you go?" I didn't want to spend another day trapped in that silence, so I got dressed, put on an old cardigan, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, and the world felt bigger than I remembered. I walked to the end of the block. Then the next day, I walked 2 more blocks. The day after that, I made it to the park, and that's where I met Ruth. She was sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons, wearing a sun hat, and humming an old tune I hadn't heard in years. I sat a few feet away, not planning to speak, but after a while, she looked over and smiled. "You're new here," she said. I nodded, "Just needed some air." She patted the bench beside her. "Air is better with company." That was the beginning of something unexpected. Ruth was 81, and sharp as a tack. She'd lost her husband 10 years earlier, and had been coming to that same bench every morning since. We started meeting a few times a week, then almost daily. We talked about everything: our families, our regrets, our favorite songs from the 60s. I told her what had happened with Daniel, with Linda, with my children. She didn't gasp or judge. She just nodded and said, "It hurts worse when the knife comes from the people you fed." That sentence settled in my soul like truth. Through Ruth, I met other women, widows, divorcees, grandmothers, raising their grandchildren, women who had loved deeply, lost painfully, and survived anyway. There was a quiet power in their presence. They didn't need to say much, just being near them reminded me that I wasn't alone. One day, Ruth invited me to a community center for a knitting group. I almost said no. I hadn't picked up my needles in years, and I didn't think I'd have anything to offer. But she insisted, so I went. The room was filled with women chatting over cups of tea and baskets of yarn. I sat at the edge at first, unsure, but someone handed me a pair of needles and said, "Just start. Your hands will remember." And they did. With every stitch, I felt like I was sewing parts of myself back together. I laughed for the first time in months when someone made a joke about how knitting was cheaper than therapy. And maybe they were right. I began to look forward to Tuesdays at the center. I started baking again, this time, not for a husband who didn't care, but for friends who genuinely appreciated the gesture. I brought cookies, lemon cake, and sometimes just stories. It was in that little circle of women that I found something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. Not long after, the center put up a sign asking for volunteers to help with Reading Hour for Children. I hesitated. What did I know about children anymore, when even my own didn't want me? But something inside nudged me forward. I signed up. The first time I sat in front of that little group of curious eyes and opened a storybook, I felt a flicker of something warm. They listened, they laughed, they asked questions, they hugged me after. For the first time since my life fell apart, I felt like I mattered again. I started writing in a journal every night, not just about the pain, but about the small victories. Talked to a new woman at knitting group, walked for 30 minutes without stopping, made someone smile today. Little by little, I was building a new life, not the one I had planned, but one that belonged entirely to me. I learned to enjoy solitude without feeling lonely. I rearranged my furniture, redecorated the bedroom, donated the old suits Daniel had left behind. I made space for new memories. No one was coming to rescue me. No one was going to apologize. And that was okay, because I was no longer waiting. Had spent so much of my life being a wife, a mother, a background character in other people's stories. But now, in my late 70s, I had finally become the main character in my own. And the most beautiful part, I was just getting started. It's funny how life comes full circle, how the same people who once turned their backs on you suddenly show up at your door, expecting you to open your arms like nothing ever happened. But I'm not that woman anymore. The Eleanor who begged her children to call, the one who cried alone on her birthday, the one who sat at the window, hoping to see her grandchildren walk up the front steps. She's gone. She died slowly, quietly, over many lonely months. The woman I am now, she knows better than to open old wounds just to make others comfortable. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I got the first call. I was sitting on my porch, sipping tea and watching the birds fight over the feeder. My phone buzzed, and when I saw Michael's name flash on the screen, I nearly dropped it. I hadn't heard from him in over a year. I let it ring. Part of me didn't want to answer. I was afraid of what I'd hear, or worse, what I wouldn't, but my fingers moved on their own, and I pressed accept. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was shaky. There was a long pause before he said, "Dad's in the hospital." I didn't say anything. "He had a mild stroke," Michael continued. "He's stable now, but they don't know what the long-term damage will be." I waited. Then he said it. "Linda left." 3 words. Just like that. Apparently, as soon as Daniel became a burden instead of a prize, Linda packed her bags and left him alone in the hospital. Michael said she didn't even leave a note. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a small, sharp sense of justice. Not joy, never joy, but a grim acknowledgement that maybe the world hadn't completely forgotten about fairness. "She never really loved him," I whispered. Michael didn't argue. Then came the part I knew was coming. "Mom, I'm sorry." He told me they had all been wrong. That they didn't see what Linda really was until it was too late. That they had believed Dad's version of the story, where I was cold and bitter and distant. That they had wanted to believe in love, even if it was built on a betrayal. He said Emily had cried when she found out what Linda had done, that Paul was ashamed of the way he spoke to me, that they all wished they had listened. And then came the question that felt like a knife disguised as hope. Can we come see you? I didn't answer right away. I looked around my porch, the little garden I had planted, the rocking chair Ruth gave me before she passed, the wind chimes that sang with every breeze. This was my world now, my peace. And they hadn't been part of it. Where were they when I needed them? Where were they when I was on my knees, praying for a sign that I still mattered? I thought of the holidays I spent alone, of the birthdays without a single phone call. I thought of how they'd smiled in photos with Daniel and Linda, while I sat home in silence. And then, calmly, I said, "Why now?" Michael didn't have a real answer. Just guilt, regret, the things people always carry once the damage is already done. "We were wrong," he whispered. "We know that now." I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I simply said, "I'm glad you see it, but that doesn't undo what happened." They came anyway, a few days later. All of them, Michael, Paul, Emily, even the grandkids. They brought flowers, apologies, shaky smiles. We sat in my living room, the very room they had avoided for so long, and they tried to bridge a gap that had grown far too wide. I listened, I let them speak. I accepted their words, but I didn't pretend everything was fine, because forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. Told them I had built a life without them, that I had found peace in their absence, that I no longer lived for their approval or their presence. And, though I still loved them because a mother's love doesn't disappear, I would never again allow them to treat me like an afterthought. I watched their faces shift from hope to quiet, understanding. They stayed for a while. We talked about light things. The children asked questions. We laughed, even, but something had changed, something they could feel. I wasn't desperate anymore. I wasn't begging for scraps of affection. And they weren't in control of my happiness. When they left, I stood in the doorway and waved. It felt final, in a way, not because I was cutting them off, but because I was finally free. I had spent so much of my life being a foundation for others, holding them up, making sure they had everything they needed, even when I was crumbling inside. Now, I was finally building something for myself, and if they wanted to be part of it, they would have to start from the ground, just like I had. I'm 78 years old. It still surprises me to say that out loud. Sometimes I look in the mirror and I still expect to see the woman I used to be, the young wife with hope in her eyes, the tired mother with flour on her apron, or the heartbroken woman left behind by everyone she loved. But I don't see any of them anymore. Now, I just see me. And for the first time in a very, very long time, that's enough. Peace didn't come to me overnight. It didn't arrive wrapped in forgiveness or delivered by apologies. No. Peace crept in like morning, sunlight after a storm, slowly, gently, almost shyly, and only after I had sat alone in the dark long enough to recognize the light when it returned. It came in quiet mornings on my porch, wrapped in a blanket with a cup of tea. It came in the laughter of children during reading hour at the community center. It came in the firm hands of women who had lost as much as I had and still stood tall beside me. It came when I realized I didn't need anyone else to validate my worth, not a husband, not children, not even old friends. I used to believe that my value came from how useful I was to others. I cooked, I cleaned, I comforted, I sacrificed. I gave so much of myself away that when I was finally alone, I didn't know what was left. But now I know. What's left is a woman who has lived through betrayal and abandonment, and is still standing. A woman who lost everything and rebuilt herself from scratch, a woman who found joy in the smallest things again. Yes, Daniel is still around, though we haven't spoken in years. From what I've heard, he's not well, and maybe there was a time I would have rushed to his side, out of duty or habit or love, but not anymore. He made his choices, so did Linda, and so did my children. We talk now, occasionally. They send cards, they call on holidays. Sometimes they visit. I've forgiven them, in my heart. But that doesn't mean I've forgotten. That doesn't mean things are what they once were. And that's okay. Because peace doesn't require perfect relationships. It only requires boundaries, truth, and the courage to live on your own terms. At 78, I've learned that love isn't always enough. Sometimes people love you the way they know how, not the way you deserve. Sometimes people fail you. And sometimes you fail yourself. But that doesn't mean the story is over. If you're listening to this, if you're someone who's been left behind, who's felt invisible, discarded, forgotten. I want you to hear me when I say this. You are not done. No matter how old you are, no matter what's been taken from you, you are still here. And that means your story is still being written. You are allowed to start over. You are allowed to let go. You are allowed to build something new from the ruins. And most importantly, are allowed to choose yourself. I spent decades giving everything I had to other people, and I don't regret loving them. I don't regret the meals I cooked, the lullabies I sang, the sacrifices I made, but I do regret waiting so long to love myself. So now, every day I wake up, I say a quiet thank you, not to the past, but to the present, to the air in my lungs, to the quiet in my home, to the freedom in my soul. And if I have any advice to leave behind, it's this. Don't wait for someone to come save you. You are your own rescue. If my story touched your heart even just a little, I'd love for you to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it's a friend, a sister, a grandmother. Maybe it's you. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story like mine. These stories matter. Our voices matter. And in the comments below, tell me, have you ever had to start over after being betrayed? Let's lift each other up. Let's remind the world that it's never too late to begin again. With all my heart.